52. Short chapter. I think I'll get through it. The next morning, all three of the scout teams met with Gunny. Mark was tired. The evening before, they had been busy with Joe's funeral, which went about as well as could be expected, and the meeting where there were more and more speculation about the president's address. In addition, Mark had nightmares about his family. It seemed that each time he managed to go to sleep, some new terror manifested itself in his dreams. First, it was the MZBs after them. Then it was the burst flu and the FEMA goons, or they just ran out of food and starved to death. Each nightmare woke him up in a cold sweat, and it seemed an eternity until he could calm down enough to go back to sleep, just to have the process repeat itself. Mark was somewhat surprised by how Gunny started the meeting. "I want to congratulate the 12 of you for making it through the first day of training," the old man smiled. "But don't get a big head just yet. The toughest part may be over, but you still have several more tests to pass. The part that'll probably be the hardest for some of you is the physical test. It's divided into two parts. First, you have to run a mile in 8 minutes or less. Then you'll all wear a pack that weighs 25% of your body weight plus your rifle and complete a 3-mile course in less than 50 minutes. The course will include push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, belly crawls, shooting from different positions, shooting and reloading while on the move, and anything else I can think of. You have to be able to do this 3 weeks from today. So if running ain't your strong suit, you better start training." He looked right at Jess as he said the last sentence and paused. "And if your marksmanship ain't up to par, you better work with Jim." Another short pause. "I know all of you can pass this test if you put your mind to it. You may ask why I'm making this a requirement. Scouts are just that. They find the enemy, not fight him. If you get into a tough situation, I want you to run back here lickety-split if possible. And if you're forced into a firefight with a larger force, you better be able to shoot if you want to survive. Any questions?" Gunny looked at each person, and no one asked anything for a few seconds. Finally, Jim raised his hand, and Gunny pointed at him. "Are we going to replace the men who quit?" "I was coming to that. We're not going to replace them right now. Later, we'll train some others, but for now, we're going to go with 2 6-person teams. This will let us get you all out into the field the fastest, and if a couple of you don't make it, we'll still have 2 5-man teams. Mark, all of your team, except for you, will be assigned to Jim. Victor will be second in command. Mark will move to Susan's team, and he'll now be in charge of it. Susan will back him up." Susan crossed her arms, and her eyes narrowed. "So you don't think we women can handle ourselves without a man to tell us what to do?" she said venomously. "No, Susan." Gunny emphasized her name to show that he wasn't calling her Missy. "It's not that at all. Mark is a logical choice to put with your team. We need to split the teams equally, and since his wife is with you all, no hanky-panky. No one can be accused of any hanky-panky. Mark has the most experience, so it only makes sense to put him in charge. Plus, this is only temporary. When we get more people trained, I'll probably put him in charge of a new team." "So we're going to have the same assignments as Jim's team?" Her voice still had a razor's edge. Mark leaned into her. "Susan, you need to cool it." She now glared at Mark the same way she'd looked at Gunny. "If you have enough team members after the test, you'll be treated the same as the men's team," the old Marine answered. Susan didn't say anything else. Mark didn't know if Gunny's answer had satisfied her or if she was being quiet because he had said to. Gunny spent the next couple of hours lecturing about what the team should look for if they encountered a group of possible bad guys. He went over numbers, weapons, supplies, organization, and other things that would be helpful for them to know if they had to defend against an attack. When Gunny was satisfied with the answers everyone was giving, he moved them to the rifle range and had Jim go over some advanced techniques. Everyone seemed to do pretty well except for Letty. She really had a problem shooting the AR-15, even though she did well with a pistol. After a couple of hours of rifle and pistol training, the two teams were dismissed until the next morning. On the way back home, Mark realized he was supposed to have gone over to the Watsons to check on how Tony was coming with the night sights. He mentally kicked himself for not remembering. He wondered what else he was forgetting. Who needs a laser? He's got a Miller. Dinner was good, even if beans and rice was becoming an every other day occurrence. The news mostly went over the new FEMA rules the president had explained on Tuesday night. Everybody in Bexar County was advised to make their way to one of the two established shelters in San Antonio, or the new one in the far northwest corner of the county as soon as possible. Anyone who had a running vehicle was instructed to bring it and any gasoline they might have to the shelter closest to them. FEMA would then use them to help those who were too infirm or too distant to make the trip without assistance. Those who were unable to relocate without help should remain at home until a FEMA representative came by to make arrangements for transportation. Mark was glad they weren't faced with having to leave their homes. It made him hope Kurt could convince FEMA to leave their county alone. He certainly didn't want to turn any of their vehicles or other supplies over to some bureaucrat. The talk at the meeting was mostly about FEMA. The populace of the subdivision was split almost exactly down the middle by two opinions. Some felt it was about time the government did this and that it was their duty to do whatever they could to help, even if it meant lending their cars, trucks, fuel, or whatever FEMA needed within reason. The other half argued the government had no right to commandeer any private property. Besides, one man argued, who got to decide what was within reason? What if they ask for your food, he demanded. What if they tell you that you have to work for them for free because there's a national emergency? Do you think that's within reason? They wouldn't do that, someone answered. Probably not, Ralph said, joining the fray, but there are laws and executive orders on the books authorizing them to do those things, and many others. I did a paper on executive orders in law school. If you read them, it's scary what they can do if they think they need to. Look at what they're doing to the people in the next county. Most of you probably think that if the people who live in Bexar County don't report to a shelter, they won't be able to eat. But I know some people there who live outside of the city and are probably better off than we are right now. They already had water wells, gardens, and farm animals before the burst. I know a guy who has all of those things, plus a big tank full of catfish and bass. His wife cans what they get out of the garden every year, and he shoots 2 or 3 deer a year from his back porch. He told me once that he could live for a long time without ever stepping foot off of his property. Put yourself in his shoes. Do you think he should have to leave it all behind just because the government said so? Doesn't he have the right to decide what's best for him? No one said a word, and after a minute, Ralph continued, We have all worked very hard to make sure we can take care of ourselves. We've even helped some people less fortunate than we are. What if FEMA comes to our county and wants to move us to a place where they say what we get to eat and what we get to do and where we can and can't go? What'll we do then? No government toady is going to make me move off my property, Don Wesley yelled to a chorus of applauses, with some yells of, You tell 'em, and hell yeah thrown in. That's the way I feel too, Ralph said after the clapping had subsided. But what if they use the National Guard to try to force us to move at gunpoint? I don't think that will happen, but each of us needs to decide how we'll react if it comes down to that. Again, it was quiet. Ted asked a question after a moment. How do you think we should deal with that, Ralph? I'd start with passive resistance. If all of us refuse to go, they'll probably decide that we're not worth the effort. And if they decide to force the issue, then we actively resist. Ralph's tone carried more meaning than his words. The residents started talking quietly in small groups. It was obvious to Mark that most of them hadn't considered this possibility. If he hadn't spoken with Kurt on Tuesday, he probably wouldn't have either. He thought it might be good to let what Ralph had said sink in for a while. Thanks, Ralph, for telling us about this. I think it would be good for all of us to think about what we should do and talk about it again tomorrow evening. The crowd nodded their heads as one. No one had other business, so the meeting was adjourned. After the meeting, Susan came up and talked to Mark. I guess you know I didn't like you telling me to be quiet this morning. Mark nodded his head as Susan continued. In fact, it pissed me off pretty bad. But I was quiet because you're in charge of our group, and it wouldn't look right if I argued with you in front of everyone. That was the right thing to do, Mark said. He wondered why she couldn't extend the same courtesy to Gunny. I do want to talk to you about it, but I didn't want to do it until I calmed down. And are you calmed down now? Yes, she said. I've been thinking about it all day. I was right to say something. Even Gunny saw that I was right and said he'd treat us the same as the men. But if I hadn't spoken up, I don't think he would have been fair with us. I expect that from him, but I don't expect it from you. You made me feel like I was wrong. Her face got redder by the minute. I thought you were on my side. Mark didn't think that she was as calm as she said she was. He felt more like he was dealing with a teenager than a grown woman. She seemed to take this equality thing too literally. Her me against the male-dominated world attitude was becoming a problem. He had to make her see the reality of the situation. I think you were wrong, and I'm not on anybody's side. You were right when you said the women should get a chance to prove they could do the job as well as the men can. I stood up for that. And you're getting your chance, aren't you? But when Gunny assigns us a job, you can't question our orders. You need to separate being on the security committee from being on the scout team. On the committee, we're all equal, but on the team, Gunny's our boss, and when he says jump, the only question out of your mouth should be, how high? But I think it... Mark interrupted her. He had to bite his tongue not to call her Missy, as immature as she was acting. Susan, I'm not going to argue with you about this. His voice was firm and authoritative. I'm going to tell you that you'd better wake up and smell the coffee. You and the other women passed Gunny's first test. In fact, you did better than the men did. But you better take a hard look at our team. We have a big test coming up in a couple of weeks, and the only person, I'm sure, can run the 3 miles within the time limit is Letty. And I don't know if she can pass the marksmanship test. The color drained out of Susan's face. You don't think we'll pass? She seemed shocked at this revelation. Not if the test were today. I think you can all pass if you work at it. But all this he's not being fair whiny shit of yours is a distraction not only to you but to the rest of the team. I'm not whining. I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets treated the same. Now Mark was getting mad. Then I hope you get just what you want, he said, and he turned and walked off before he said something that would cost him. He walked into the house and took a few deep breaths to calm himself down. It didn't help much. Jess walked into the kitchen. What's the matter? Nothing, really. Just something Susan said. Mark tried to decide if he should tell her. She decided for him by changing the subject. Honey, I need 3 favors, she said sweetly. Just name them, he said, hoping he wasn't in too much trouble. First, I need you to spend some time with Timmy and Tommy like you promised. I know you've been busy, but it's really important that they get to know you. I'll do it tomorrow, he agreed. What else? I need you to run with me in the morning. I have to get a lot faster if I'm going to pass Gunny's test. She smiled seductively. And as for the last favor, I'll let you guess what it is. The next morning, Mark and Jess ran 3 miles. She did better than he'd expected, but her assessment of needing to be faster was dead on. Mark's leg was feeling much better. He noticed that he wasn't favoring it at all today. Even Lisa was pleased with how it was healing. When they finished the run, Jess made Mark promise to keep working with her. Brother Bob held Sunday morning services in one of the empty fields. Most of the neighborhood attended regardless of their denomination. Mark, Jess, and their now 4 children were there too. The preacher kept it fairly short since everyone was standing. Mark prayed that his family was safe wherever they were, and that God would keep the neighborhood safe from MZBs, FEMA, and anyone else who would destroy what they had worked so hard for. After lunch, Mark and David played catch with Timmy and Tommy. Mark was surprised at how good the boys were for their ages. Tommy told them Rodney had been their baseball coach since they were old enough to play t-ball. Later, Mark pulled out David's old Stevens single-shot .22 and started teaching the boys how to shoot. They'd never shot more than a BB gun before, but they caught on quickly. Afterwards, the 3 of them returned the rifle to the safe after they'd cleaned it together. When they were done, Mark sent the boys to clean up for supper. Before Timmy left, he hugged Mark's leg quickly and then ran off after his big brothers.